Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to House Resolution 1176, I call it the conference report on Bill H.R. 2 to provide for the reform and continuation of agricultural and other programs of the Department of Agriculture through fiscal year 2023 and for other purposes, and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 2, an act to provide for the reform and continuation of agriculture and other programs of the Department of Agriculture through fiscal year 2023 and for other purposes.
Pursuant to House Resolution 1176, the conference report is considered read. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Conaway, and the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Peterson, will each control 30 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in strong support of the conference report to H.R. 2, the Agriculture Improvement Act of 2018. It is fitting that the House today consider that farm bill because 28 years ago, another proud Texan, President George H.W. Bush, signed into law the 1990 Farm Bill. For the first time since 1990, Congress is poised to pass a new farm bill in the same year that the legislation was first introduced. In many ways, the 1990 Farm Bill laid the groundwork for today's U.S. foreign policy. U.S. foreign policy is no longer the old command and control policies of the New Deal, but rather a market-oriented risk management approach that helps America's farmers and ranchers survive natural disasters and the predatory trade practices of foreign countries like China. Our nation's farmers and ranchers are the very best in the world, but they cannot compete alone against a sea of high and rising foreign subsidies, tariffs, and non-tariff trade barriers. Nor can they survive alone in the face of record droughts, hurricanes, wildfires, and other natural disasters. That's why we have a farm bill. Mr. Speaker, not since the early 2000s has a farm bill been more desperately needed than it is today. Our farmers and ranchers are going through a very difficult recession right now. Net farm income is down 50% from where it stood just 5 years ago, the largest drop since the Great Depression. And farm bankruptcies are up by more than 30%. We've all seen the devastation of recent wildfires and hurricanes. Less noticed, but no less destructive, is a severe drought that has gripped many parts of the country, perhaps none more so than the one I get to represent. Even less noticed is the rampant cheating going on in the global trade that hurts our farmers and ranchers every single day. China recently oversubsidized just 3 crops by more than $100 billion in a single year. Put in perspective, China spent more on excess illegal subsidies in a year than the entire U.S. safety net covering all commodities will cost in roughly 2 farm bills. That's why passage of this farm bill is so important. The farm bill is never easy to pass. The needs of our farmers and ranchers are greater than they've ever been in a long time. But we've operated under a flat budget. For my colleagues who are concerned about the deficit spending, please note that this farm bill is budget neutral. This follows on the heels of a 2014 farm bill that has come in significantly under budget also. Mr. Speaker, here are some specifics of the 2018 Farm Bill. First, the Farm Bill honors the request of nearly every farmer and rancher that we do no harm to federal crop insurance. Second, we strengthen the Farm Bill safety net for all farmers and ranchers. Believe it or not, there are actually pressure from some in the other chamber to cut the farm safety net at a time when the whole point of a farm bill is to help our farmers and ranch families. Third, we strengthened key conservation initiatives, especially the Environmental Quality Incentive Program. These highly successful conservation initiatives serve as a prime example of how voluntary, incentive-based conservation beats burdensome, arbitrary, and costly Washington regulations every single time. Fourth, we honor the request of farmers and ranchers to fully fund our trade promotion initiatives, which could not be more important than they are right now. This includes fully funding the Market Access Program and the Foreign Market Development Program. We also succeeded in maintaining the vital link between America's farmers and ranchers and U.S. food aid by preserving the in-kind food assistance to our neighbors in need from around the world. Fifth, we make some extremely important investments elsewhere in this farm bill. We increase individual farm service agency loan limits, which have not been updated in 16 years. We increase agricultural research funding at a time when we are dangerously lagging behind China. We also provide Secretary Perdue with the tools he requested to effectively combat the opioid epidemic and also to expand high-quality broadband service in all of rural America. We increased investment in new crops new crop uses, and especially crops, including fruits and vegetables. And we increase the investment in the nation's livestock sector by strengthening our nation's animal disease prevention management efforts, including stockpiling foot and mouth disease vaccine. Finally, it's fair to say that there's been philosophical differences in this conference committee. Achieving common sense SNAP reforms, preventing wildfires, and providing regulatory relief are just three of the examples. Despite this, we make common sense reforms that improve the program integrity and work requirements under SNAP, including involving governors in the work requirement waivers so that there's a political accountability, and by reducing state allowances for able-bodied adults without dependents. We require states to adopt case management practices to help move SNAP beneficiaries from welfare to work, and we eliminate $480 million in bonuses we pay to states for simply doing their job. These and other reforms will build on the success we had in moving more than 9 million people off of SNAP rolls and into the workforce over the past 5 years. The Farm Bill will also reduce forest fuel loads to reduce the incidence and intensity of wildfires. This is achieved by expanding the insect and disease categorical exclusion to remove hazardous fuel loads and by empowering state, local, and tribal authorities to remove timber. And nobody deserves more credit for working to improve our nation's forest management than my friend Bruce Westerman from Arkansas, whom I'm proud to have had as a signatory on this conference report. These reforms are important, and they are the only start in what we need to be done. Ultimately, we had to make a decision between making as many inroads on reform in these areas as we could, or allow America's farmers and ranchers to be held hostage. Faced with that choice, I chose the route of getting this Farm Bill done. We made important inroads wherever we could on these reforms. We work to provide the strongest safety net possible for our nation's farmers and ranchers. In closing, I'd like to thank Ranking Member Peterson and our counterparts in the other chamber for bringing this conference report to final consideration. I extend my sincere gratitude to President Trump and Secretary Perdue for their unwavering support of our farmers and ranchers. And I greatly appreciate the support and hard work of House leadership and members of my conference, especially my fellow conferees, for all they've done to stand by rural America and those families who feed and clothe us. For the sake of rural America and our struggling farmers and ranchers, I urge my colleagues to support this Farm Bill so the President can sign this measure into law. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
And I rise today in support of the conference report on H.R. 2, the Agriculture Improvement Act of 2018. The conference report we are considering today would reauthorize Farm Bill programs for 5 years. The 2014 Farm Bill expired on September 30th, and while the road to get here has had a few bumps along the way, I'm glad that we're finally able to reach an agreement, and now it's the time to get this done. During a time when rural America is facing a downturn in the farm economy and a trade war that's taking a toll on crop, livestock, and dairy producers from coast to coast, this bill will provide needed certainty to farmers and ranchers. The bill continues a variety of commodity, conservation, trade, nutrition, credit, rural development, research, energy, and specialty crop programs. It also provides a permanent mandatory funding for several of the programs that first got mandatory funding in the 2008 Farm Bill when I was last chairman. These include the Local Food and Farmers Market Promotion Program, the Value Added Producer Grant Program, the BFRDP program, organic research, and Section 2501 outreach programs. One of the most important pieces in this bill, however, is the improvement that it makes for our dairy farmers. The economic downturn in farm country has hit dairy industry probably hardest of all. And in my home state of Minnesota and neighboring Wisconsin, an average of 2 dairies are going out of business every day. The provisions in this bill will provide expanded, affordable coverage options and more flexibility for dairy farmers, and I am proud to put my name on this program. We are also providing $300 million in mandatory funding for animal disease programs at a time when our U.S. livestock industry is facing a continued danger from unchecked threats from different areas. That money will go to increasing our ability to prevent and respond to animal pests and diseases that harm our animals and threaten the viability of our livestock operations. There are folks who have liked to have seen, would have liked to have seen different directions taken on several issues in this bill, but this is a conference report where the House and Senate figure out where the common ground is. I'm proud of the work that we did together on this bill, and I am very appreciative of the hard work of the majority and its staff, as well as my staff, under the direction of Ann Simmons and Troy Phillips. My staff put their whole selves into this bill, and I want to thank and commend them, Lisa Shelton, Keith Jones, Prescott Martin, Katie Zink, Patrick Delaney. And special thanks to my former staffers who worked on the bill, Mary Carnegie, Liz Freelander, and Evan Jerkovich. And to Clark Ogilvie, who missed the Farm Bill so much that he came back to the committee to help us finish it. And thank you also to Patty Ross and the Leader's Office, Tom Marr and the Whip's Office for their help, and all of the folks at USDA and CBO for their hard work in getting us to this point. Also the House and Senate Legislative Councils who helped us put this bill together. So I think we have a good bill, a good compromise. I would encourage my colleagues to support this effort, and I look forward to continuing the discussion on many of these issues into the next Congress. With that, I yield the balance. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Minnesota reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to recognize the former chairman of the committee, Frank Lucas, and current chairman of the subcommittee on conservation and forestry for 2 minutes.
The gentleman from Oklahoma is recognized. 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, I'd like to take for just a moment and thank our ranking member and our chairman. When you consider what it takes to pass a farm bill, when you consider how difficult the challenges are, think of the last three in total. Chairman Peterson had to overcome 2 presidential vetoes to get the bill on the books, and I supported him. In the 2014 Farm Bill, it took me and my friends here 2.5 years to get a farm bill on the books. And now, Chairman Conaway, you shouldn't have had to go through some of the challenges that Colin and I went through, but you did it, and you did it for the best interest of America. Because what's a farm bill all about? Set the nuances of the various policies aside. It's to make sure that we have the safety net to enable us in this country to raise the food and fiber we need at an affordable, safe, cost-effective rate to meet our needs and the world's needs. And what's the other part of the Farm Bill? It's making sure our fellow citizens who have difficulty in overcoming their challenges have access to enough of those calories. Plain and simple, that's what farm bills have been about since 1933, making sure we all eat cheap, well, and safe. But they've gotten harder and harder because the tendency of this body is for some folks on one side of the room to press for a particular perspective and other folks on the other side of the room to press for the diametrically opposite perspective. But ultimately, on the Ag Committee, under the leadership of these fine gentlemen and their wonderful staffs and all of our colleagues on the committee, we still do the right thing. We do policy every 5 years that works. We do policy that meets the needs of our fellow citizens and, for that matter, helps make sure the world has enough to eat. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. Let's pass this bill with the overwhelming intensity it deserves, because that's what our neighbors back home deserve. Yield back.
The gentleman from Oklahoma yields back. The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia, one of our subcommittee ranking members, Mr. Scott.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a great farm bill. There's so much in it, so many great things. But in this farm bill is perhaps the absolute best example of bipartisanship at its best. To have Democrats and Republicans working together to give $80 million to African American 1890s land grant colleges and universities. I just want to say a big thank you. I want to thank our ranking member, Peterson, and I want to thank Mike Conaway, who started with me on this journey. God bless you, Mike. Thank you so much for your help. And I want to thank our friends over on the Senate side. I want to thank Senator David Perdue, who took the reins over there and helped put the money back in. I want to also thank Senator Robertson, the chairman of the Senate committee. I want to thank my staffer, Ashley Smith, my legislative director, who worked night and day with me on this bill. And I want to thank God Almighty, ladies and gentlemen. God had his hand in this to pull Democrats and Republicans together to give $80 million to badly needed African-American land-grant colleges and universities. Only God could pull this together. And we thank God for this blessing and for touching the hearts and the souls and the spirit of all of my colleagues who will vote for this historic bill. And I want to thank also the staff of both the Senate Agriculture Committee as well as the House Agriculture Committee. Thank you all for the work that you all did in this bill. And I thank you for all the people in America who are grateful for this, but especially the African American community thanks you for opening up these opportunities for their light to shine as well. Thank you.
Yields back. The gentleman from Minnesota reserves, and the gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, it's now glad to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Georgia, Austin Scott.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And first, I want to thank Chairman Conaway and Ranking Member Peterson for their leadership during this process. I rise today to urge my colleagues to support the conference report to the 2018 Farm Bill to provide the first major reforms of our nation's agriculture policy in nearly 5 years. For the last several years, members of both sides of the aisle have worked to make sure that our nation's primary agricultural policy works for American producers. This year, I was honored to once again be chosen to serve on the Farm Bill Conference Committee to fight for the good people of Middle and South Georgia who dedicate their lives to agriculture. I'm confident that this bill delivers the reforms that our farmers and industry stakeholders desperately need to keep our producers and rural communities growing and innovating for the 21st century. This bill strengthens the farm safety net and provides certainty and flexibility that our producers need. It also ensures that our farmers can provide the food, nutrition, and fiber not only for America, but the rest of the world. In this legislation, we've laid the groundwork for expanding quality broadband access to rural America by giving the USDA the tools and resources to bridge the digital divide that is leaving millions of rural Americans behind and hindering our communities from thriving. I'm very glad that 2 amendments that I authored were included in the final agreement, which will bring modernization and accountability to broadband services and spur broadband infrastructure investment in rural America. Bridging the digital divide is something I've been fighting for years now, and I look forward to seeing the growth in the network service and infrastructure development through the provisions of this bill. In this conference report, we also found some common ground to make improvements to SNAP.
Expired.
I strongly urge my colleagues to support this conference report, and I yield the remainder of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Speaker, I'm pleased now to yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Ohio, one of our subcommittee ranking members.
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, and I thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me begin by thanking my good friend and the ranking member, Colin Peterson, as well as my fellow conferees, the staff, for their leadership in negotiating this conference report. The Farm Bill Conference Report is a good bill. It is not a perfect bill, but certainly worthy of our support. I am pleased members of both sides of the aisle and across the chamber were able to reach consensus on how to show the American people that Congress can work together. This agreement protects SNAP by rejecting proposals in the House Farm Bill that would have severely weakened the program and taking food assistance away from nearly 2 million people. This agreement increases access to healthy foods in underserved communities and takes steps to tackle food waste, which we know is a major problem. This agreement builds new opportunities to improve soil health and water quality in the Great Lakes. This agreement provides beginning and minority farmers and ranchers additional tools and resources needed to own and operate successful businesses. This agreement authorizes $350 million per year for rural broadband coverage. This agreement expands investment in low-income urban and rural communities. And finally, this agreement provides certainty and sound agricultural policies for America's producers and consumers. I encourage my colleagues to join me and vote yes on the final conference report. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from Minnesota reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now asked to recognize another member of the committee, Jamie Comer, for 1 minute.
The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been a long road of debate to reach an agreement on the 2018 Farm Bill. This bill benefits all of rural America, our farmers, producers, and consumers. The agreement we've reached on this year's bill includes many important provisions that will help farm country during tough economic times, fully protecting crop insurance and providing certainty to farmers. I'm particularly glad to see industrial hemp descheduled from the controlled substances list, a key provision I worked with Leader McConnell on to ensure unnecessary government restrictions are lifted from this valuable agricultural commodity. I thank Leader McConnell for his collaboration and attention to legalizing industrial hemp, and I appreciate all of my colleagues who supported this issue and helped to bring it to the table. I was proud to represent the interest of Kentucky farmers during this process, and I look forward to a new year of growth and prosperity for farmers and producers across rural America. I yield back.
The gentleman from Kentucky yields back. The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from California, another one of our subcommittee ranking members, Mr. Costa.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank my good friend, Mr. Peterson, for yielding the time, and I thank him for his work, along with Chairman Conway. And I want to thank the committee staffs on both sides who have worked so hard and diligently over the last year. Mr. Speaker, as a member of the Farm Conference Committee, I'm proud to support this bipartisan farm bill. As a third-generation farmer, I have the honor and the privilege of representing one of the largest and most diverse agricultural regions in the country and in the world. California grows about half of our nation's fruits and vegetables, the largest ag state in the nation. We're number one in dairy producing, number one in citrus production, grapes and wine products, also the largest producer of tree nuts in the world. With over 300 crops, the list goes on and on and on. We are truly blessed in California. And so this agricultural legislation is so important. The dairy title, the changes made in it are very helpful. With increased research funding, risk management tools like crop insurance, trade promotion programs, this bill is not only good for the San Joaquin Valley that I represent, California, but the entire nation. So we must understand that the conservation programs are also an improvement to help with groundwater sustainability and air quality, which are critical in California. The forest management improvements will make a difference in western states like California, where we've had horrific and devastating forest fires. The vital SNAP benefits are maintained, and voluntary employment and training programs that I fought for are strengthened. The 10 pilot projects in the 10 states I find will provide better ways for us to get people on their feet who are in need. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I support this farm bill, and I urge my colleagues to do the same. It is a good work product. It is good on behalf of American agriculture and all of the interests that put every day America's food on America's dinner table. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from California yields back. The gentleman from Minnesota reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And now I'd like to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Nebraska, Adrian Smith, a former member of the Ag Committee.
The gentleman from Nebraska is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to express my strong support for this Farm Bill Conference report. Given the ongoing challenges in the agriculture economy, it is very important our producers have policy certainty as they make their spring planting decisions. I held a series of listening sessions around Nebraska's 3rd District, our nation's #1 producing district for agriculture, last year to hear producers' thoughts about the Farm Bill. The #1 item on producers' minds was the continuation of strong crop insurance. This bill accomplishes this objective. The bill also recognizes the challenges and threats facing our livestock producers by creating a disease prevention program and vaccine bank to help contain potential future outbreak of disease within the livestock industry across our country. This bill and continued positive progress on trade will go a long way toward increasing producers' peace of mind. I encourage my colleagues to join me in supporting this important piece of legislation, and I appreciate the support of the administration in bringing this legislation to a successful conclusion. Thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman from Nebraska yields back. The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer.
The gentleman from Oregon is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the gentleman's courtesy in permitting me to speak on the bill. I commend Mr. Peter in particular for guiding this important piece of legislation that actually includes many provisions that I've been working with for over 12 years. He's been successful in protecting key democratic priorities, especially nutrition, and avoid damaging poison pill provisions. And near and dear to my heart are the reforms for hemp. I'm concerned that it does not adequately address the growing crisis in American agriculture. I spent 3 years going around Oregon talking to people, putting together our little Fight for Food booklet and legislation. We're not dealing with the chemical warfare inspired by Monsanto and Bayer. We've got the Trump tariffs, climate devastation that is getting more serious by the month. We have a crop insurance program that is not just wasteful, but fails most farmers and ranchers that I represent, and indeed in most states. While I appreciate the legislative accomplishment that is represented here, I look forward to starting the next Congress with then Chairman Peterson to see if we can build on this foundation to narrow differences, broaden areas of agreement, to do better for our farmers and ranchers, better for the environment, better for taxpayers and everyone who eats. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Minnesota reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now please yield a minute and a half to the gentleman from California, Doug LaMoffa.
Gentleman from California is recognized for a minute and a half.
I rise today in support of the conference report to H.R. 2, but also strong commendation towards our chairman, Mr. Conaway, for having the many, many hearings about all aspects of the Farm Bill and the condition of the ag economy in this country. This does represent a strong compromise that responds to the needs of rural America, where stability is needed. Certainty to the farmers and ranchers weathering a 50% drop in farm income in recent years. A positive step for rural America and its economy, where stability, again, is greatly needed. Much needed resources to remote rural towns to improve broadband connectivity, which is critical for telehealth and further rural development. It acknowledges the challenges faced by many California farmers, including prioritizing mechanization research to help address the continued ag labor shortage. It maintains an accessible food supply for families in need, especially in rural, poor districts like mine, while also bringing an increment of accountability to the food stamp SNAP program. It strengthens our rural development title to boost jobs in rural America, such as water conservation improvements and incentives as well. I wish we could have done more on forestry. The town of Paradise and the surrounding area that suffered so much is a prime example of why we need to have better forest management in that state and that country, in this whole country. But I think that we'll continue to have these conversations, extremely important. So, with the worst fires in state history,
gentleman's time is expired.
I'm really, really hoping for that improvement.
Gentleman has an extra
I commend
30
Chairman Conaway for fighting for the policies that support American agriculture. We're in tough times right now with 5 years of lower incomes and the consistency and stability that farmers need, all of America needs in the rural economy. This farm bill will make a significant impact in helping on that. I thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman from California yields back. The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, could I get where we're at time-wise on our side?
From Minnesota has 19 and a half minutes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr.
The
Speaker.
gentleman from Texas has 16 and a half minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I yield 1.5 minutes to the gentlelady from Delaware, a member of the committee, Ms. Blund Rochester.
Thank you.
The gentlewoman from Delaware is recognized for a minute and a half.
Thank you to my colleague, friend, and ranking member, Colin Peterson, for his wisdom and steadfast leadership through the Farm Bill reauthorization process, Chairman Conaway, and to all of the staff who worked tirelessly. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of the 2018 Farm Bill and to commend my colleagues on the Farm Bill Conference Committee for a truly bipartisan and bicameral product. I stand confident that the bill will move Delaware and our nation forward. It gives Delaware poultry growers the vital conservation resources they need when they need them. It shores up an already strong crop insurance program that protects our farmers against catastrophic loss. It provides additional sustainable resources for 1890 land-grant institutions, ensuring schools like Delaware State University continue their crucially important research while preparing the next generation in the ag economy. And it also ensures nutrition benefits are maintained and protected for our children, seniors, individuals with disabilities, and families who rely on the social safety net to navigate difficult times. All of these accomplishments were made possible by cooperation and compromise, which drew me to the Ag Committee in the first place. We came together, we got something done, and that's what the American people want to see. This is a farm bill we can all be proud of, and I ask my colleagues to support it. I yield back.
Yields back. The gentleman from Minnesota reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now I'd like to yield a minute to the gentleman from Georgia, Rick Allen.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of the conference report to H.R. 2, the Agriculture and Nutrition Act of 2018. Facing a nearly 50% decline in net farm income over the past 5 years, our nation's farmers and ranchers have had their backs against the wall for far too long. Today we have an opportunity to right that ship, to secure a brighter future for our producers, rural communities, and American consumers. As a member of the Farm Bill Conference Committee, I'm confident that the agreement we have reached will strengthen the farm safety net and provide a sense of certainty and flexibility for those who feed and clothe our nation. We've been working on this legislation since I came to Congress, and I'd like to thank Chairman Conaway and the entire House Agriculture Committee for their work. I encourage all my colleagues to join me in supporting H.R. 2 to reinvigorate rural America. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Speaker, I'm now pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from North Carolina, member of the committee, Ms. Adams.
The gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank Ranking Member Peterson for yielding, also Chairman Conaway for all of the support. I am proud today to speak on behalf of the 2018 Farm Bill. This bill is a strong bipartisan piece of legislation. It works for families, for farmers, and for all communities. The Farm Bill now avoids disastrous cuts to SNAP, a program which helps put food on the table for 44,000 people in Mecklenburg County alone, many of whom are children. Additionally, the bill now avoids the mean-hearted, unreasonable work requirements that had been in the previous version House Farm Bill. As founder and co-chair of the bipartisan HBCU caucus, I am particularly proud to have helped secure key resources for 1890 land-grant universities in this bill. The Farm Bill authorizes $50 million to create 3 centers of excellence at 1890s, and it ensures equity between land grants by removing provisions that strip away unspent extension funds for 1890 schools and mandating a report that outlines research and extension funds for all land grant institutions. This major legislative win for our land grant HBCUs. These are the reasons why I founded the HBCU caucus, to bring together a coalition of Republicans and Democrats to fight together for greater funding and equity for all of our schools. I want to thank all of my colleagues on the conference committee, and I urge my colleagues to support this bipartisan bill later today. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from Minnesota reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's now my pleasure to recognize a delegate from Puerto Rico, Ms. Jennifer Gonzalez-Colon, for 1 minute.
Gentlewoman from Puerto Rico is recognized.
Thank you, and I want to thank the chairman for allowing me, even when I'm opposed of one of the provisions of the bill, to speak about it. As you may know, this bill got a lot of good things and good provisions for all the states and for the territories as well. And but there's one provision that would never were allowed to even discuss in a public hearing, and it's the prohibition or ban to the cockfights in the territories. The current Farm Bill allowed territories to have and regulate that industry. In the case of Puerto Rico, that represents more than $18 million in revenues and taxes. And we are in the brink of a lot of financial situations, and now this regulation will put another burden in the people of the island. So I'm against that prohibition. Mostly when people of Puerto Rico regulated the industry of cockfighting since 1933. So this is something that not just Puerto Rico, the rest of the territories, as we've been facing this kind of industry in sport. We don't have the votes in the Senate. We can't vote on the floor of the House. So our people are not fiscally represented, and as well, the Congress is taking an action that would put another burden in our economy, and with that, I'll yield back the balance of any time, saying my opposition and the people of Puerto Rico against that provision, but in favor of the rest of the bill.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Speaker, I'm now pleased to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from California, member of the committee, Mr. Panetta.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thank you to Chairman Conaway and Ranking Member Peterson for your leadership during my time on the Agriculture Committee, during our time putting this Farm Bill together. As a proud member of the Ag Committee, as a proud member who represents the salad bowl of the world, I am very proud to support H.R. 2, this Farm Bill in 2018. In my district on the Central Coast of California, this Farm Bill will benefit our specialty crop industry by investing in mechanization technology and expanding research opportunities. It will help our organics industry with the certification process and research by incorporating the OREI Act. This bill invests in our future farmers, our young ranchers, and veterans getting into agriculture. And it doesn't make any changes to SNAP without any evidence supporting such changes for the people who need food the most. Mr. Speaker, I'm at the end of my first term in Congress, and I can tell you this is the best job I have ever had, mainly because of the members of Congress I work with, mainly because of the Democrats and Republicans I have worked with on this Ag Committee, including its excellent staff. So despite the fact that there were differences over this Farm Bill at the beginning, and even though we are on the verge of a possible shutdown, what gives me confidence in this job, what gives me confidence in this body, is this final version of this Farm Bill. This is a bill that, although it started as a partisan product, it ended as a bipartisan bill. It's a bill that is not based on ideology and emotion, it's based on evidence. This is a bill that is not based on party politics, it's based on people. Not just people in agriculture, but all of the people of this nation. That is why we all should be proud to support the Agricultural Improvement Act of 2018 and vote yes on the final conference report. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Minnesota reserves. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, my pleasure to recognize the gentleman from New York, John Faso, for 1 minute.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your leadership, and thank the ranking member for his leadership on this legislation. The conference report provides much-needed resources that will help farmers cope with a 5-year, 50% collapse in the farm economy, the largest such drop since the Great Depression. During this process, we have acted in a bipartisan fashion to fix broken government programs that have not worked as intended and left farmers with nowhere to turn. In upstate New York, perhaps none are hurting more than our local dairy farmers. New York is the 3rd largest dairy state, and our farmers are hurting. The current dairy programs do not work, and improvements to the Farm Bill, combined with those in the Bipartisan Budget Act from earlier this year, will help our farmers weather the storm. We've made the dairy safety net more flexible by increasing coverage options, more affordable by reducing premiums, and more enticing for participation by bringing more incentives for those farmers to participate. We've also worked to protect the SNAP program and laid the groundwork for future Congresses to make additional changes by incentivizing work through better local workforce consultation and reducing the number of waivers that states can bring. We can bring more recipients into the workforce during a time of record low unemployment. Additionally, changes like the National Accuracy Clearinghouse and minimum standards for participant tracking will help enhance program integrity and ensure that benefits are available to those that need the most. Mr. Chairman, I urge adoption of the Farm Bill. Upstate New York and our farmers have waited long enough, and I'm proud to support this legislation.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm now proud to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, member of the committee, Mr. Evans.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank both chairmen for their leadership in this opportunity of bringing us all together. I chose to be a member of the Agriculture Committee because this committee has jurisdiction over some of the most critical issues facing our community, that is food and nutrition. Even back in Pennsylvania, one issue that has been central to my work is ensuring that people in every neighborhood in Philadelphia, between West Philadelphia, North Philadelphia, South Philadelphia, had access to safe, healthy, and reasonable price food. In Philadelphia, 20% of our population is food insecure, meaning 1 in 5 Philadelphians don't know where their next meal will come from. I'm pleased to see that this bill maintains SNAP and does not weigh down poor and hungry Pennsylvanians with onerous work rules. But let's be clear, this is just a beginning. No child should go to bed hungry. No parent should have to make the choice between putting food on the table or keeping the lights on. In times of peace and in times of war, our soldiers must always have food sources in order to provide the necessary safety and security our democracy depend on. As a member of the Agriculture Committee, I had the opportunity to meet with members of the ag community at all levels, from farmers to consumers. I've come better to understand the needs of the Pennsylvania hardworking farmers and others in the broad agriculture community through events such as the Pennsylvania Farm Show and the Progress Days. And over time, through meetings with advocates, the Pennsylvania Farm Bill, the Food Trust, the National Youth Farmers, the Coalition for Abundance, Central Food Bank, and Natural Urban League. I'm happy to say that this bill does a lot of work for them. In addition to SNAP, this bill addresses hunger increasing for everyone. This bill also provides great flexibility in coverage and tools for Pennsylvania dairy farmers, investing in rural infrastructure, supports research at 1890 land-grant universities, and maintains fundamental conservation programs. Food unites us. Food is medicine. Food is foreign policy. And I say this bill is a starting point. We have to work together, and I look forward to working and building it even stronger. I thank both chairmen, and I thank the staff for all the collective work together. Yes, we should vote a resounding yes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Minnesota reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve.
The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Sheila Jackson-Lee.
The gentlewoman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank you very much. Last year in Hurricane Harvey, many in my community became food insecure. I cannot tell you how important maintaining the current SNAP benefits are. And I thank the chairman from Texas and my good friend to be chairman from Minnesota for their coming together. The importance of funding going to my land-grant colleges are enormous in training new farmers. And the work that is being added as a member of the Homeland Security Committee on adding broadband in the rural communities, something that is so dearly needed and has been promised for many, many years. The fact that we're expanding access to the FSA farm loans for veterans, but more importantly for beginning farmers, creating a new pathway for those who are providing us as the breadbasket of the world. And then in the rural areas of my district, rural economic development is crucial, and the rural development funds are vital. So many things have been able to occur because of this funding. I ask my colleagues to support this bill because this is a perfect coming together. As former Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm said, a tree grows in Brooklyn. It's a good coming together of urban and rural, supporting a dynamic bill and providing that Americans are not food insecure and our children have the nutrition that they need. Let us vote for this bill. I yield back.
The gentlewoman yields back. The gentleman from Minnesota reserves. The gentleman from Texas recognized.
Mr. Speaker, may I inquire as to how much time is left on both sides?
The gentleman from Texas has 13.5 minutes, and the gentleman from Minnesota has 11.
Continue to reserve, thank you.
The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'm now pleased to yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, member of the committee, Mr. Soto.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
I thank the gentleman from Minnesota and the chairman from Texas. It's been a long road, but it looks like we're bringing it in for a landing, and America is thankful for a farm bill that we could all be proud of. That includes Central Florida. We saw huge issues included to help out our orange growers in Central Florida facing citrus greening, which is really hurting our local growers and hurting that iconic orange juice coming from Florida. We saw the inclusion of an animal health vaccine bank, which helps out ranchers both in Central Florida and throughout the United States. We saw a SNAP program that will continue to help out needy families. We saw prioritizing conservation, which is a win for both farmers and conservationists alike in an ever more crowded Florida. We also saw 4 bills that we crafted and put forward included, and I thank the gentleman from Texas and the gentleman from Minnesota for their help with that. The Veterans with Disabilities language that provides technical training, that was something that I got an idea of when I was out in Midland, speaking to one of the gentlemen from Texas's constituents. The bill that allowed for authorization of agricultural research between the United States and Israel is a program that needed a long time to be authorized, and we're excited to have it. Algae-based research to look at biofuels is helpful. And just to conclude, we're also developing high-tech sensors in Central Florida for agriculture. And I thank everybody on the committee for their good work, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Minnesota reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve.
The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Speaker, I'm now pleased to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Florida, member of the committee, Mr. Lawson.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. You know, for the past 2 years, serving on the Agriculture Committee, we have worked on the Farm Bill, but also in my district, which is so important and critical, we've had 2 hurricanes. And the Farm Bill, the resources that we've had from previous Farm Bill were very significant. We just got over Michael, which has caused a lot of damage throughout the district. But the most important issue, even the other things that we're doing for farmers in this, is about food insecurity. And when I talk about food insecurity, I talk about going into my area where 100% of students on free and reduced lunch. And the Farm Bill takes care of that. I need to congratulate my leader, my chairman over here, for their work and the hard work they put in to make this reality. Also in this Farm Bill is money for historically HBCUs, African American universities, to do more research and to get more involved, and so we can feed America. I'm so proud, and I ask all my colleagues to vote on positive for this Farm Bill, because one great president said, people will little notice, not long remember what we say here, but they will never forget what we did here. And I can tell you, when we vote for this bill, people in need, farmers, all those people that this bill, our Forest Service and everything, they will never forget what we did here, and I encourage you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Minnesota reserves. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I continue to reserve.
The gentleman from Texas reserves. The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I think we're out of speakers on this side as well. So are you
I'm prepared to close.
ready to close?
I'm prepared to close.
Well, I just would say again, thank you to everybody that was involved in this, the committee members, the staff, the majority members and staff. It was a bumpy road, but we figured out how to get through it and came to a bipartisan conclusion, and that's the important thing. So this is a good bill for my district. I think it's a good deal for agriculture in the general around the country, and it's a good bill for America. So I ask all my colleagues to support H.R. 2. I yield back.
The gentleman from Minnesota yields back. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And before I finish, I would like to also add my thanks to the staff, the majority staff, minority staff on the House, as well as the minority and majority staff in the Senate. Untold hours were spent getting us to this place by these hardworking men and women who labor in relative anonymity. Colin and I get all the gratitudes and pats on the back and hugs and smooches, and they do all the hard work. I'd like to recognize Matt Schertz, my staff director, Bart Fisher, the deputy staff, Patricia Strawn, Nicole Scott, Rachel Millard, Josh Maxwell, Jennifer Tiller, Paul Bolzano, Trevor White, Callie McAdams, Caleb Crosswhite, Carly Reedholm, Molly Wilkin, Mindy Brookhart, John Weber, Jeremy Whitty, Ashton Johnston, Yasmin Ray, Darrell Blakely, Abigail Camp, Ricky Schroeder, Margaret Weatherald, John Kanya, Maggie Mullins, Fazil Siddiqui, Brian Martin Hayes, Kevin Norton, Brandon Reeves, and Nicole Bain for all the hard work, all the time spent away from families over the last year plus getting at this point. Mr. Speaker, in a few minutes, there are going to be red and green lights go up behind your head. Pressures facing America's farmers and ranchers and their families are just unimaginable to those of us who aren't directly in the business. Pressures of 5 years of reduced income, 5 years of burning through savings and capital, 5 years of really difficult circumstances, commodity prices low and no real relief on horizon, trade turmoil across this world, lots of things going bad. As I mentioned earlier in my conversation, the 30% increase in bankruptcies. But Mr. Speaker, the one thought that troubles me the most is the increase in suicides. The pressures of losing a multi-generational farm and ranch operation must be incredible to cause men and women to decide to make an awful decision as a result of those pressures. This bill will help alleviate that. This bill takes a look at those pressures, takes a look at the stresses and strains across all of rural America, the economic development issues, the issues within just the practice of farming and ranching. It says, here are federal resources that we want to put against those problems, against the issues of farmers going out of business and continuing to provide to the American consumer the most abundant and safest and affordable food and fiber supply of any developed nation in the world. Across these last 2 years with President Trump in office, you've seen an awful lot of comments about Buy America and let's produce things in America. There's nothing more American than food produced in our nation. And this bill will keep us in that vein. It'll keep those farmers and ranchers taking those risks that none of us could imagine year in and year out, worrying about Mother Nature, too much rain, too little rain, rain at the wrong times, too hot, not hot enough. All those things that they have absolutely no control over, they will fight that fight day in and day out, and they're the best in the world at doing it. What they can't, though, is fight against is a cheating that the trade world that's out there, fight against commodity prices that they can't control. They can't control their input costs. They are takers of those costs, and they're takers of prices. They are at the mercy of an awful lot of pressures and stresses and strains that this bill tends to address. So, Mr. Speaker, the green lights, in my view, when they start lighting up, will be the members who have taken a look at all these things, all these issues that are facing rural America and our farmers and ranchers, and will say, yes, this bill does in fact address those. It does get at those issues. It does offer 5 years of stability for these folks, 5 years of lenders being able to understand what the safety net will look like and being able to lend against next year's crop, 5 years of certainty. We all work better under certainty, and knowing what this farm bill looks like, right, wrong, or indifferent, is far better than the option of rolling this over to next year and starting this process over. Those red lights, the green lights, will be members who've looked at all that and said, yes, this bill is worthy of my support, worthy of my vote. Mr. Speaker, the red lights will say something entirely different. It will say we looked at those exact same issues, we looked at these solutions, these federal resources, and said either they're too much or not enough, or they wanted to go somewhere else, or, Mr. Speaker, unfortunately there'll be some who say, well, there just wasn't things in there that we like to have happen. Mr. Speaker, the House version that we passed back in June took some mightily bold steps toward reforming SNAP and moving in a direction that most of us believe was supported by the American people, and that asking SNAP recipients to work 20 hours a week in order to maintain that public benefit, that public effort, we believe was the right way to go. That was not supported broadly by the body across the building, and we made the compromises necessary to get us to this place. In spite of that, though, Mr. Speaker, we made good reforms toward the SNAP process, toward program integrity, and making the program work better for our folks that are in need, that need these programs. The House version never intended to touch, and nor did it touch, the folks that we will always take care of, the elderly, the mentally, physically disabled, those that are temporarily out of whack. That never touched that. What it did, Mr. Speaker, was go after those folks that are able-bodied, should be working, and should be in the workforce. We've got 7 million unfilled jobs today, and there's work ahead of us to make this happen. So, Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned, I thank my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. Thank Colin Peterson for his hard work on the conference committee. Thank our Senate colleagues who took a different view, but we are here today. And Mr. Speaker, I pray that when the lights go up behind your head, that there are more green lights and red lights. We can get this at the President's desk, get that certainty from rural America that's necessary. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back, and all that time of debate has expired. Pursuant to House Resolution 1176, the previous question is ordered. The question is on the adoption of the conference report. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the conference report is adopted without...
Speaker,
the gentleman from Texas?
The Speaker, on that, I demand the yeas and nays.
The gentleman... The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote for the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. Okay. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, proceeding will resume on the questions previously postponed. Votes will be taken in the following order: adoption of the conference report on H.R. 2 and the motion to suspend the rules and concur in the Senate amendment to H.R. 2454 if ordered. The first electronic vote will be conducted as a 15-minute vote. Remaining electronic votes will be conducted as 5-minute votes. The unfinished business is on the question on the adoption of the conference committee report on H.R. 2, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title.
H.R. 2, an act to provide for the reform and continuation of agriculture and other programs of the Department of Agriculture through fiscal year 2023 and for other purposes.
The question is on the adoption of the conference report. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.
369. The nays are 47. The conference report is adopted. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table.